Okay, good evening. I hope you all received. You saw what I sent to the group? Yeah. That's what I'm going to do now. This is going to be quite interesting, I would tell you. So what I did was I collected together, actually, a full disclosure. I didn't prepare this tafka for this class. I did it a few years ago for the shluchim. And it was really very powerful. At the kinnus, I did this. I collected together answers, not all to me, but most of them I received directly from the Rebbe in the years of working on the sichos. And that were more than just an answer, but actually hiras klolis, general directives of how to address different issues, basically communications. That's why I call the 10 hiras that Rebbe taught me about communicating chassidus. But as you'll see, it goes a lot more than just communication. It's really, you see real methodology here. So though we've been talking about it after every week, I just thought to do this grounded. So you have in this booklet, which you could print out. I was going to print it out, but we didn't end up doing it, so you could see it on the phone. Let me pull it up myself. I have a printout, but I think it's clear. Let me just... So you could print it out, and you have 10 different hiras, which I'll sum up right now. And actually, kisvei yad, the Rebbe's actual handwriting, in most cases, with a pinuach, spelling out what the Rebbe actually wrote. So we'll begin. So here are the 10 points, and we'll go through them in order. Why can't I find it? Okay. What's the group called? Kayla, right? Yeah. Okay, got it. Okay. So here they are. You see, a little creative. Just to make it easier, you're always trying to find a way to make a Rosh Hashanah that remembers. So I made it Shliach 10, based on the sichos of the Rebbe, Simchas Torah involved, and other sichos that the Mashiach is gematria Shliach with Eser Keiches HaNefesh equals Mashiach. So here they are, the 10. Sourced, grounded. That means everything has a mokir, everything is grounded in sources. 2, heartfelt and sincere. Everything is with Vorem HaYetzim and Alev. It's not just facts and information, but with hearts. Lasting impact. You don't just think about what you're going to accomplish right now, but what the hemshech pul and hemsheches will be. Sometimes you give somebody an approach, an answer, but it's not really long-term. It's for the immediate. To think, in other words, sometimes you say something, and later, when you come to realize that you have to know what the results will be. Number 4 is initiative and action-based. That should always be me'er to somebody with a takeaway message, that they will take initiative, that they will do something. And even more, not just do, but they will initiate. 4 is applicable and relevant. That should be relevant, not just an abstract idea. 5 is clarity, carefulness, and precision. That communication always has to be very clear, whether it's in writing or in speaking. The precision. The next is hopeful and positivity, always with a positive approach, never with negativity or with critique. Always like the Tach Gut V'Zayin Gut approach. Transformative, empowering is number 8. In other words, it's about helping someone change their life. It's like a deep impact, not just a superficial impact. Empathy and sensitivity, which may sound a little like heartfelt and sincere, but as you'll see, it's a different Hadrocho by the Rebbe in different areas. So basically, everything done with sensitivity, communicated sensitively, not just that you're being sincere, but it's communicated, especially sensitive matters. You'll see when we go through the 10. And the number 10, nuanced and subtlety. that sometimes the biggest things are the things that are like seem to be very small detail, but there's a nuance. Nuance means like between the lines, not just expressing an idea, how you say it, and say it with the right type of Hadrocho and so on, which is like the trop, so to speak, not just the teichen, but the way you say it and the nuanced, which by the Rebbe, as we'll see, was a tremendous element. I learned so much from the Rebbe's nuances, even more sometimes than the teichen itself. It's how it's said, and that, I mean, some of these ideas I've already shared in the previous shiurim, but now we're doing it more in the context of the Rebbe's. So I started with sources grounded. Okay. So, looking at this document, let me see if I can read it. Do I have to go here? Yeah. Yeah, you can blow it up and you can see. So this is an answer from the Rebbe about the importance of always having Mar Mikemus. So before I read here, you all look, the first thing you see in Likutei Sichos, or in Sichos, or in Sefer HaSichos. What is the first thing, even without learning it? You see hundreds of footnotes, sometimes 200, 300 Mar Mikemus. But the Rebbe was so negeya that everything has a Mar Mokim. Obviously, if it's a Yesh Leimer B'derech Hefsher, it's not going to have a Mar Mokim. But everything should have clear sources. To the extent, I remember, it was Bereishis, Shabbos Bereishis, Tavshim Mem Aleph. There was two Fabrengens then, because Simchas Torah was Friday, so there was two Shabbos Bereishis Fabrengens, 1:30 and one in the evening, before the Shkia. And at the time, the Sikha was printed then, and we forgot to Tzeichen, Bereishis Bara Lekimis, Shema V'Saris has a Mar Mokim. You don't need to look it up. Everyone knows the Mar Mokim. Bereishis Aleph Aleph. Or in English, it would be Genesis 1:1. Bereishis Aleph Aleph. And Bereishis Sibbe was not printed with that Mar Mokim. And the Rebbe spoke a whole Sikha, so upset. Like you think, okay, Volmar Mekem is the only one everyone knows. You don't even need to Tzeichen. Everyone knows where Bereishis, but it's the first pasuk in Chumash. But still, and the Rebbe said something interesting. He said, if you don't make a Mar Mokim on that means it felt the Nekuda as Bereishis Aleph Aleph, the Reishis of all Reishis, and Aleph Aleph is as the Ebershter Bashaf in the Welt. And we don't say in that, like you forget the Sedon Ebershter of the Welt. That's how much the Rebbe was so makbid. Obviously, it had many messages, but that's what the Rebbe said then. So the diuk of Mar Mikemus, I can't tell you how many sikhs the Rebbe, there was missing a Mar Mokim, the Rebbe always question mark, sometimes exclamation point, how could you not make a Mar Mokim, etc. I'll tell you even more. I remember once, the Rebbe even wrote, a sikh, I think it's Vayesha Mem Zayin, the Rebbe wrote on the side, the teichen of the sikh there was about that when you have two things, two options, and one is more difficult and one is easier. So Zarai, the more difficult one you don't want to do is usually the sign the one you should do. Brings the story of Rabbi Nachum Chernobyl. So the Rebbe wrote on the side, Lapel Mavil, shocking that you forgot a Ferish Mar Mokim, a raya for this. Now, obviously, the Rebbe's Mavil for a Pashta raya, as you'll soon see, is not a Gemara you're going to guess. So what could the Rebbe have meant? But he was Mavil. He was like shocked that we didn't figure that the Gemara. What's the Gemara? Eyev Seina Kedim. By the Rebbe, that was a raya that if you like something, you don't like something, the Seina has to be done first. There it's talking more about helping someone, a pekel, or whatever it may be, with what's the mishpatim, kisira chamer senacha, etc. But the Rebbe, by him, everything where you could find a maramokim should be a maramokim. So let's just read quickly the tzattel here. This note the Rebbe wrote. I think on my phone it's clearer. Yeah. As here is harbe nidresh beitzol le'er hamiyuedes letzibur harochav. Let me just read. Heirasi kama pa'amim. The Rebbe is being made. That I've already indicated many times. Sheba hameitzi le'er, sheba hamitzim le'er, ubefrat. What does it say here? Kishagam le'ela shaleisata einem anashi yichya. So when you publish something, especially for people who are not yet from Anash, leisata, tzorich liyas mara mikemis. You need sources. Ubemiyuchad bavonen shaliyeh mukshe memaymer chazal umipsak din kiyetze b'zeh. And specifically, that there's someone learning it should not. You have to bavon preempt that they shouldn't have a question from a Maimer Chazal or from a Psak Din. If you bring a source, it's clear. And if there's Taka Astira, fine. So that you look into it, but you have a source. You write something without a source, and someone remembers a Maimer Chazal that's different, it puts in question the whole Teichen of the Dvorim. Al Kaponim Tirutz Beremes. Include Al Kaponim try a Tirutz at least Beremes, if there is indeed a contradiction. Upshita sheposuk u'maimer Chazal yeh kitsurose. And that means when the Rebbe spoke, he wanted the posuk u'maimer Chazal to be exactly as it's written, not the way the Rebbe said it. Kitsurose, in other words, exactly as it's state. You can't write Bereishis bara havayas or shemayim v'sa'aretz, even if the Rebbe said it. So come on, there's a kavana. But in print, you have to write exactly as it is kitsurose. Ubefrad benuden dudan ramasti matzrich bavornish befrad. Ubefrat benuden dan. No, but it's a Ramasti period. What's he mean? I'm not sure what he means here exactly. Ubemiyuchad. I'm sorry, Ramasti. Matzrich bavornish befrat the din ha'esik b'tzarchit tzibur shelo yukshe mishulchan aruch simen ayin u'kumuvon le'somu lev l'chol zeh. Okay, he's referring to a particular thing which I don't recall now what it was, but he's talking about something specific, clearly with Simanayin. I'm not sure what it was. Okay. So what's the main point I want to bring out here? The grounding. That's why I mentioned, and by me, this is a ikar shabeikar. I teach, I write, I communicate a lot, I do a lot of programs. And to me, it's always, how you say this, everything I look up in the source, and make sure it's clearly, obviously if you give a beard in it, you can explain things, but it's grounded, it's a whole different world. People then respect it. You're going to be more mechuven to the MS, because it's not just Tama theory. I see so many times, even guys that learn, good learners, they don't look it up. They forgot what they learned 10 years ago. They're just saying it. And when you look it up, you see, 1 second, it's diminished. I mean, I've worked with many people, Talmidei Chacham, and I said, where'd you get that from? He says, isn't that what it says? I said, did you look it up? No. So it knows how we remembered it. And then what happens is, if someone receives it, I'm a Kabul, says, could I trust this guy? It's not even what it says. So again, there's not a problem to say, Yesh lehem b'derech eretz, you can explain things. But when you're grounded, it evokes a whole different level of trust and a whole different level of, obviously, authenticity. So that's settle number one. I started on the left. Actually, I should have started the other direction. Okay, fine, doesn't matter. On the right side of the page, oh, actually, that is the order. Okay. One second. I'm confused here myself. Oh, this is an interesting settle from the Rebbe that I thought was very interesting. Hamana Mekamis, the Rebbe explains now another reason, importance of sources. He says, Hamana Mekamis me'edir al kaponim achodim ha'ashemim liris b'fnim. So it evokes that people, at least some of the listeners, will go look inside because they see a Maramakim. You look it up. So that causes them to actually learn more things. Even if one person will do that, it's worth making a tziyun, a maramakim. And here's something which you're not going to see very often. The Rebbe says, the Rebbe is explaining about himself. I don't know if you know this, that the Rebbe, one of the big chidushim of the Rebbe, before many other things, was the Rebbe made mafteches on Tanya, Tere'er, Al-Kutei Teira, and the Rebbe Rashav's Mamorim, and the Frierdiker Rebbe's Mamorim. The Rebbe was made mafteches. Maftech is not a quick job. It's a lot of work. And also, as the Rebbe says, Maramikemis. Look at all the Maimorim of the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Rebbe writes in Agdomis, Al-Pi Tzivui, or Al-Pi Heiros, Kedushas Meiri V'chami. I added some Maramikemis. As a matter of fact, there were people who had tainas that the Rebbe's adding Maramikemis. The Rebbe's a Maimer. Why is the Rebbe? Taka son-in-law. So the Rebbe changed, you'll see, he used to write Al-Pi Heiros, then he changed Al-Pi Pekudas, Kedushas Meiri V'chami. So it wasn't just Heiro, it was a Pekuda, a command, which was the Frierdiker Rebbe insisted. So the Rebbe is explaining why, because in Nisraba Cheshach, when there's more Cheshach in the Welt, you have to add more grounding, more Maramikemis, and so on. He compares Mafteches and Maramikemis to Mivtzoyim. Mitzrayim, why did the Mitzrayim come? Because there's more cheshach. What do you need Mitzrayim? All the mitzvahs were always there. That's what the Rebbe says. Nesef al de Erevin chof aleph sof amid beis nun dalet sof amid beis. There it says that mafteches is aznaim l'teira. That when you make a mafteach, like an index, it's aznaim l'teira, meaning it's support. It helps you learn teira prep better. That's this settle about with Marmikems. Let's move to the next. The next. Go ahead, sure.
Was there anything from the Rebbe that you should increase Marmikems so that there's two places in Shas that it brings it, you should do more of the merrier type of thing?
Not necessarily, no. Not necessarily. Listen, there were different shittas on how to make Marmikems. I personally, in the work I did, and I also worked in Sefer Lekutim, so I had like more ideas from Tzemach Tzedek's Maimorim, which is filled with Marmikems. Tzemach Tzedek's Maimorim, everything is sourced because he uses Beis Adin. Everything is very grounded. So my general approach, I learned from the Rebbe. I went to study the Rebbe's Ha'aras a lot, and I saw when the Rebbe brought a Maimon Chazal, how many times did he bring it? He didn't bring all of them. The Rebbe would bring one or two. Sometimes, if there was one that was a different lashon, or it was negated to the Havana, that I would say, but sometimes that. And a third Maimon Chazal is brought like this. And sometimes the Rebbe would even answer why Maimon Chazal, the Shinu Nuschayis or Girsayis. So the Rebbe didn't, usually you don't bring all. I mean, there are places that you'd have to bring 20 things. It would be En Ladov Sof. Kemuvin, some Maimon Chazal is only once or twice. Generally, 1, 2 was the max. Only if it was maybe a little more complicated. The third one is like if a certain Gemara added something that the other Gemara didn't have. But you'll see a lot that will say Gemara, they'll say Vishan. Because Visham Nisman basically is like saying that Gemara or that place, you already find more Makedas. So once you write Vishan, you don't need to make all the Marmikems. So Vishan was like a shortcut, so to speak. Once you said a few, Vishan. Like if you say an encyclopedia, it's always Vishan. Because the encyclopedia was just collecting Visham Nisman. I mean, there were a lot of rules and guidelines. I personally studied the Rebbe's Ha'aras. The Rebbe has hundreds and hundreds of Marmikemis. I mean, you can't imagine how many Sfarim have Marmikemis from the Rebbe. Era Teira, Baim Rabim, Friedik Rebbe's Maimorim, Rebbe's Rebbe Rashab. I mean, there's hundreds of Marmikemis from the Rebbe. So there's a lot of shittas you learn from the Rebbe's Marmikemis. And Mafteches I should add as well. Okay. It's another discussion. Once you need the rules, if you do it, you know how to do it properly. Let's go to the next, more sources and grounded. So here we have two different, again, the next page is again side by side. We talk about, should I go, in Hebrew. I'll go from right to left. Likud Meteris Abbeseinu Sienu. So the Rebbe writes here, Poshet. Let me just make this large. Here's what's talking about a sefer that was being malakit, gathering. You know, you have these like Hechel Menachem gives out. What do they call like the Shad Hadzdokeh, Shad this, Shad that? They're taking different sichos or maimorim and putting them in an organized likud. So here's the Rebbe's hero about that. Poshet, the Rebbe writes, one. She'ein has the Rebbe gave it. They gave it into the Rebbe. So the Rebbe says, Poshet she'ein has man grama klal she'aver uva'avaker hachemer v'gam ein ze mi'inyani. So number one is there's no Zman Grama, there's no time for me to go over and check all the material. And V'gam, it's also not my inyan. That's not my inyan. Now, what does that mean? The Rebbe never did it. He did it. But to make the Rebbe, that's his tafkid. That's not his inyan. Number two, Sha'inyan bal achrayis gdela. This idea of gathering from the Rabbeim and summarizing that this is like a definitive summary of the Rabbeim is a big achrayis. 3. Leheitz le'er b'sefer b'fnei asmei hatokas k'toyim b'sifri Rabbeinu b'shuli hagilyin marmikeim b'sekiyetze b'zeh. So in other words, don't just do it without sources, because you can go and collect from a bunch of places and just write it up like an encyclopedia. But it should be done as sefer b'fnei asmei, meaning it's not replacing the original Sfarim of the Rabbeim. And you're quoting Katoim, like you just, let's say Avis Yisrael. The Rebbe made a Kuntus Avis Yisrael. The Rebbe made that himself. So obviously it has the full Achrayis. So the Rebbe took pieces, and every piece has in the bottom a Maramakim. Where did it take it from? Where's it coming from? From the Pardes, from Baal Shem Tov, from this one, from that one. So the claim by Misibra, Bishuli Hagili Mana became a Kiyetsa Bezet, Hamadabrin Ba'isa Inyan, Beloshan Harav. So in other words, it shouldn't be reworked, it should be Beloshan Harav. Okay. Be'im Yachlitu, Mechanchim Mashpim Beretz HaKedesh Sheyochel Hanal. So now the Rebbe goes on. If educators in Mashpim and Eretz Yisrael, where they were publishing this, feel that this is possible, these Tanoim that Rebbe just made, B'chlal moving shetzarech liyas one mudgish shezo al achrayis hakesav sheyichel lechud. That even with all this, you still need to write that this is the achrayis, the responsibility. That's where you always find al achrayis hashemim, al achrayis this, that they take responsibility. So it means if there's a mistake, it's their mistake, not chaz v'shalom mistake from the original, and definitely not the Rebbe. And two, muga hakol al yidei mashpi dach ukiyetz b'zeh ukudeboy. That everything should be reviewed and edited by Mashpi Mechsidis Ukideboy, meaning not stam as a, they should do it properly. Okay, and then the Rebbe writes often, they gave the Rebbe, obviously, this Ktoim, this Likut, and the Rebbe said to return it. So again, you see here groundedness, you see thoroughness, really Heiros how to publish. I mean, there's a lot of common sense. It's not all Gzeres HaKosov. It makes sense. On the other side of the page, more Heiros B'Keshel Atfosa. So here, what was this? The Rebbe they were printing in a newspaper. So the Rebbe writes like this. Okay, let me make this large. But Betach Hugazeh Ubafrat Ateichen al Yedei Mumchim B'Kiyetz B'Zeh. That this was certainly edited, especially the content, meaning not just the words, by other experts in this field. Van Holis Yeshivas Kivin Sheshmo Huskur Kama Pomim Ubamela Nesa Bachrayis. So you can't publish something if you're saying your name on it. You have to make sure that you take responsibility. But Kal Lahovin. It's easy to understand. Okay. Number two, Bechlal Teva Nochem. In generally is good and correct. Becholze Kivin Shenoyad Lerabim Kedai Sheyugo Edapam. In general, since it's something that is dedicated and is to the public, that you should edit it again. Levarer hayesh tzedek letzaref ilain luach hatikun ukiyetze b'zeh. I think this is a separate thing. To also check whether after it's published, you need to add another page that with corrections that may be something that's incorrect in this original document. Because I guess it was missing Baruch Hashem. So the Rebbe says to add to print, at least with a sticker, Baruch Hashem. Huh? Yeah, it could be a stamp, but gumi could also be a sticker, no? Okay, next. But Amud 11.
I mean that every page you can say Baruch Hashem.
I don't think he means every page. He probably means Bereish Kol Tefus. Each copy. The copies they were missing. He means the beginning. You don't write Baruch Hashem on every page. The beginning. Kol Tefus is a copy. It's one of the copies, not not every page. Okay. But Amud 11, Sheyishmeru al Kedushas Ha'ilan, that you should protect. In other words, like because of the Shemus, Kivin Sheboy Psukim. That's where you find in many of the flyers. You'll say, be careful not to throw it out. They write, yeah. Mikana lahaba muchrachas hagos mashpia dedach. His dabrus im sharamis asken b'kiyetze b'zeh b'chdei limnei kfiles askalatzin. Okay, similar to the previous Eirah, that going forward they should always have hagos mashpim and consultation with others that are experts in this field. Good. Next page. So we covered one. Now moving on to two. Heartfelt and sincere. So I didn't actually find an actual zettel from the Rebbe, even though I looked pretty hard. Instead, there's a very powerful sikha. It's going to be Shabbos Parsha B'Chukesai Tov Shemem Vov. Huh? What?
You mean the Maramak?
And I know, for some reason, no, I copied the page, but it's Tov Shemem Vov. Just for the record, yeah. Sefer HaSichos, it's printed in Chelik Chav Zayin, I think. So I just want to read it quickly. It's a very strong emphasis on this point So I'll read from Sif Hey quickly. I'll just do it very quickly. Bechdeas de Seder is Vadus, a Bechol Mokum. The Rebbe is talking about to make his Vadus in every place before Falag Beimer, I think. Zol Narum Nem and Vosmer Eden Berevam. Kemedubeliel, Ados Azach was in the gates to Alaman. Nit gucken die Afshar Hel Chilukim Ben Yisrael, as Evis is given by the Chagdom to Matan Tere. But it's Cheder Sivan. Oh, it's about, okay, before Shavuos, yeah. As alle Eden on Esnam sein gestanden Kishach und Belevach ist Kedaim so das Mefrasm sein Chole Fanu mit dem größten Sturm bebald das ist ein Ikri Negele Gulas Kol v'Klal Yisrael und jeder soll das übergeben zu alle die welche sie kennen der Grech. Okay, now listen. Okay, move on. Bedarke Neim und Bedarke Shalom betech Avis Yisrael but das ist der Terech HaTeire was der Cha Darke Neim v'Chol Yisrael Shalom mit Dvorim HaYetzim in Alev was darf gesehen sein sich in Nechnosim in Alev. Now, I don't remember then, but there was no question that there were probably times that unfortunately some people presented the Heror from the Rebbe like a Tzivui, Mamayel Lamato, and it wasn't always Bedarke Neim. So the Rebbe is warning that. So two things, Darke Neim and Dvorim HaYetzim in Alev. Und das Masbe sein zu jeden Lefi in Yoni Lefi Eifen Havanose. Take dem ganzen Emes von Teres Emes, aber das Gufe nimmt jeder Lefi Avanossi und Leute Chalokim beteire, was hat schon gelernt. Afalpi was wie alle Iden, hat das Scheiches zu Kol HaTeire Kula. Bemele, Eib Yesh bei Teelis is nicht negate das Ibersagen B'Shmi. It's another one of the rules of the Rebbe. In other words, if it's going to in some way stop someone from doing it, the Rebbe said, you don't have to say it in my name.
There is another Mokim.
Yeah. Yeah, because Kabbalah Semes, Misha Amre, things like that. I'm not sure what the Maramokim is, to be honest. Befrat, as we demonstrieren, der Chiyuv Gedla in von Avis Yisrael steht in alle Chelke HaTeire. In Teire Shebiksav, Teire Shebapeh, Alochi, in Rambam, in Nigla, in Teire in Primis HaTeire. Und in Primis HaTeire. Bemele kämen mit jedem Reden Leidem Chelik in Teire, welch hat gelernt und lernt. Gut. Again, der Iker is Amazorein Bedarke Neim Bedarke Shalom und Dvorim HaYetzim in Alev, nicht mit Natzchonis Chas V'Shalom, oder afile betur Rabbi und Meri Derech, mir sagt jenem, es ist nicht mein eigener Hamza, nur ich bin dir nur mehr Ehre, sollst da reingucken, wie der Linie steht in Teire, und du wirst sicher kochen in dem und noch mehr wie viel ich. It's an interesting way that Rebbe is saying how to communicate. Und man soll schön anheben können, okay, that's really the Nekuda, that's it. The Gale in your name. So it's, I mean, this is again a common sense, but here's Befeder Shehirah from the Rebbe, how to communicate. Good. We move now, Hartfels, and that lasting impact. Number 3. In Mashiach, the number 7. I'm sorry, number 3. What was number 3? What was it? Lasting impact. What happened to my thing? One minute, please. Yeah, last name, Shliach. So the L of Shliach, good. So here's what the Rebbe says here, lasting impact. Okay, this was not uncommon when we would sometimes prepare a Sikha and with a bar of Haskola and Chassidus and get a good chelik for it more than once. We still did it because smuggling some Tifach Chassidus is good, but the Rebbe did not always like it. So he says like this. Sorechian in Biyurim Bahaskola Besfiris became on Bemichtaves. Sorechian means, obviously, one needs to really wonder if explanations in Haskola and Sfiris belong in a newspaper, meaning when the Sikh is printed in the paper. Bemichtaves Kazeh, such a newspaper, Imashak Vitari Bezeh. L'chere Masim Yeser, in a newspaper, Mederech Mitzvah Mitzvah Savis Yisrael, V'netak, Kvar, V'en Chashash Yud V'zgam B'michtaveh. So in other words, it could be, I think the Rebbe is saying is Mitzvah Yisrael, V'netak. Not sure what he's saying with the parentheses, V'netak, Kvar, V'en Chashash Yud V'zgam. He basically saying that even though it's a simpler thing, so you could think that maybe was printed already in the newspaper. So the Rebbe says, not a chashash. An Ayin Beis or a deep Inyan for sure was not usually printed in the newspaper. That's what I think the Rebbe is saying. I'm not positive. But here's just, again, that what's the point? That it's all emes, it's chassidus, esesfiris, haskola, and so on. But you're talking to people reading a newspaper, and you're going to lose them. So the goal is to have an impact on them. So the Rebbe is not liking the idea of just printing things in tifa haskola. Then on the right side, again, I went from left to right. The Rebbe writes very sharp. Ulai sof sof yischiru mishu yasbiram. Maybe sof kol sof. Maybe ultimately you hire someone who's going to explain to you, who's going to explain to them. One shalakut sichos v'ha'oros nitfosim lebishvil hametz le'er kim b'shvil amadabar. The Lakut Sichos and its footnotes were not printed for the people who are publishing it, but for Amadabar. Again, focusing not on you, but focusing on the Makabel. It doesn't print number 2, because number 2 is not related to this issue. Okay, so there we go. Next page. Lasting impact. So here's an interesting one about how kind of impact it will have when you print something, cartoons. The Rebbe is talking about cartoons also in this one. Okay, let me see if okay, here it's clear. Second. Good. The Rebbe writes in Tafshin Mem, so actually, no. This is not about cartoons. Cartoons is another one later. I confused it. I'm sorry. The Rebbe here is really strong, very strong about, doesn't matter your kavanah, it's a matter with the makablim, how they're going to interpret it. In other words, what impact it's going to have on the makabel. So this is a theme that very often, many times, I remember the Rebbe writing, other tzatlach, I think I'm going to read it soon, and not everything he says on Shabbos Kodesh has to be published. So the Rebbe is writing here to Shlomo Shamir, who actually wrote the Algemeiner, and he wrote a very sharp article. So the Rebbe writes like this: "Ma'asher ani kabolas michtovim miyem dalatevus ula'achar bakosha slichosei bevadei l'schusah l'dikavosei l'meiser l'heir asher dvar hanichtav l'sheni v'alachas kam v'kam l'pirsum l'chug rochav k'lemer shekavanosim matarosa l'ashpi alav aidei hapirsum hari mashenegeu rak pirushei shel hakeda esei v'eid v'zeh ikar hamaskona shemasik b'mashakeda." Muven gamkein uposhet she'ena meduber b'michtavi zeh klal uklal ubehechlet achi gomer. Eich yashpi hadover al pu'ulis lebavich or el yachas lebavich. That's not what the Rebbe is interested here. Kim al dvar hashpo by yachas linyoni yadus b'chlalusa keil lehiro hayidua shuvet tfilat tzedakah ma'avirin. So he attacked the Taina Shahs then, and the Rebbe is telling him it's not an Inyan of Lubavitch or so on. It's the what the Makabim are going to get. Kivish shecholna Hashem, who's sefer matzliach. The Eibishter blessed him that he's a successful writer. Zeh semer shemotza hagisha eich lashpi al kedei dvarav. Hari ladaiti alov likreis amaymer eidesav medubar oidapa. The Rebbe is telling him, go read it again, your own article. Aval ki'ilu hu rak hakedev v'lo yakesev. Read it from the perspective of the reader, not of the writer. V'yishayir mahi amaskona shel hakedev kanal. Ve'im yesh malasakin ube'ez efen im amaskona mechayeves tikun. Ve'ule gam l'shatev imei misha ein negei b'dova ve'en le'dei mukdemes l'man das tguva objectivis legamri. An objective response to this whole thing. So here again you see impact. It's not about the kavanah, what you are expressing, it's about the impact on another. Okay, number 4. Everything has to come down into Maaseh B'Pel, into action, initiative, action. So here, let's see. I'll go again from right to left. Oh, this is a good one. This is a very powerful one. Here's a story like this. Before I read it, let me tell you what happened. After Chav Bei Shvat, Stalkers of the Rebbetzin, so a woman, her name was Mrs. Irving Spiegel, was a newspaper writer. He worked in the New York Times. He had already passed away. His wife wrote a letter in English to the Rebbe. And how the Rebbe responds to her is gewaltig. She writes, here you see her letter. Her letter is the English writing. Most revered Rebbe, stated March 15th, 1988, Memches. Most revered Rebbe, please accept my deepest sympathy at the passing of your beloved wife. I wish I knew what to say that would help ease your pain and grief. What words of comfort are there for me to give you who have comforted so many of us? Sincerely, Esther Basara Rivka. You hear the letter? Yeah. So the Rebbe responds to her. He circles the word words. She wrote, what would help ease your pain and grief? What words of comfort are there for me to give you who have comforted so many of me? So the Rebbe circles the word words of comfort, words, and writes like this. He writes these words. He writes a question mark. It's not words that are going to comfort me. My seha, your actions will comfort me. I'm just explaining the zettel. So she writes, what words will comfort the Rebbe? So the Rebbe said, not words, because he writes question mark. In other words, it's not about words. It's about my seha, her actions. So the Rebbe writes, Bihi yese almona, bin she, Mrs. Spiegel, was an almona, because she had lost her husband. Ubecholze, and nevertheless, mamshicha b'chaim Yehudim davke, and though she lost her husband, she continues to live a Jewish life. Shekeis sheikarti baila olav hashalom, nevod l'chaim tevim. From the time I recognized your husband, olav hashalom, zeh hoya adiyal shaloi, that was his ideal, to live a Jewish life. Harizeh atzmei idud ve'ezer. So your actions, that you're continuing to live a Jewish life, that itself gives idud ve'etzer. That was talking about himself. Gives me strength and support. So not words but actions. V'hi rotzen sheizborach b'chag haPesach kosher v'sameach v'chol hashana kula be'sofa b'chaim hanal. Okay, the bracha and the hisofa b'chaim living such a life. So b'chlal is a geschmack answer from the Rebbe, but you see again the mile of actions, not words but actions. Okay.
Why did the Rebbe choose to write this in Hebrew?
The Rebbe always did that because it wasn't to her. The maskiris would then be maitikit and translate it. The Rebbe b'chlal answered everything in Hebrew, even English letters. Now there are letters in English that Rebbe wrote in English and dictated in English. But generally speaking, many tzetlach. You'll sometimes see when the Rebbe's Magi and Nissim and Del stuff, you'll see sometimes English, but then he'll sometimes write something in Hebrew, obviously for him, because it was easier for the Rebbe. He didn't have to go parken sich in the actual English language. Okay. The Rebbe writes at the bottom, by the way, that this should be this should be included on the Michtav Kloli for Pesach to her. Be'eng means be'englit. So clearly he's writing that they should translate to English. You see? Hakloli be'englit is another part of the zettel. See on the top right, you see the box? Hakloli be'ang? That's be'englit. No, send her the Michtav Kloli of Pesach, add this in English. So that was clear. The Rebbe also writes, Betach Yasbira, you'll definitely explain to her that there's no time to write a special letter just for her. Okay, good. That's one. On the left side, here's also, I found a very interesting diuk. A second, where are we here? Yeah, on the left side and the bottom, right? So here, someone writes to the Rebbe, let me add that what I've read, you see the piece? Let me add that what I've read in Likutei Sichos so far has been a great inspiration to me. I appreciate its brilliant insightfulness. So the Rebbe circles the word inspiration and writes, Al pizeh, vaday koro shem sham tzitute piskedin chazal, psak din chazal, hamaise iker, pirkei de overs de shabazu, va inspiration bo b'maisa mitzvahs be'sofa v'Hashem yatzlicha. So the person, right, that he or she was inspired by the Likutei Sichos. So the Rebbe said, surely you read in this Sicha, that same Sicha that inspired you, that the Ikar is from inspiration should come into mice, into action. Okay. You see, the Rebbe never lets anyone just write inspiration or words. Everything comes into action. Good. Next page. Now we go to the word applicable and relevant. So 2 answers. One, I was never able to get the actual Ksav Yad, but I think I quoted it here a number of weeks ago. Sheftim Nun Aleph. Everyone knows the Sikh of Sheftim Nun Aleph, right? The Rebbe says, Mitzvah lefarsim sheyesh novi b'Yisrael, a prophet in Israel. So in Eretz Yisrael, as well as here, there was a sadist to go, yesh lefarsim. How you mefarsim? You publish something in a newspaper. So they're ready to take out a full-page ad in Chassidic newspapers to say yesh novi b'Yisrael. So they wrote to the Rebbe. Rav Shmuel Chefer wrote to the Rebbe, and here's the Rebbe's answer. This is Be'im hanal yochel yases bekelim de elam atikun v'zeh tzorich l'shayer asken be'elam atikun la'acher izbonus be'efen de elam atikun. Okay, so there's 3 conditions that this is possible. Yes, the Rebbe is basically saying Be'im, if you could make sure that it's done in kelim of elam atikun. But the Rebbe's Bavani, you could also have people from Toyu determining what's Kelim de Tikkun. No. That has to be determined by an askin who comes from the world of Tikkun. You can't have an askin from the world of Toyu telling us what Tikkun is. This is a big Bavanish. There's a lot of people who do that. And the Rebbe doesn't stop there. Third tonight. La'achar is because you can still have someone from Elam Tikkun, but he's using Klolim from Elam Toyu. So the Rebbe says, La'achar is Banus be'efen de Elam Tikkun. After contemplating the method of Elam Atikun. So I remember calling Eretz Yisrael, and I said, when I saw this settle, I wrote the Sikh of Sheftim Nun Aleph as a maniach, that the Rebbe was Magia, it was my schus. So I remember it very well. When I saw this settled years later, I didn't see this Peshaite. So I called them, I said, so what happened? They said, everyone took this answer as Loy Mitan Aleph. I said, we know the Rebbe knows how to write Loy. Sometimes he writes Mufrich Lagamri. And the Rebbe didn't write no. He made Tanoim. So they said, these Tanoim is like a no. So I came to realize that even our own Chassidic Yidden they can't even imagine that there's someone that can fill these Tanoim. By them, it's only Shaykh to Toyu. At maximum, Toyu that decides what's Tikkun and Kiyetza B'zeh. But to me, the Hera is Medidik, because the Rebbe is telling Beferish do it. Here's how you do it. So I don't know why our Teidik and Neshamas don't know how to go to people from Tikkun. Maybe they don't talk the same language. Because clearly the Rebbe said, Eres de Teo became the Tikkun. So this remains 30 years since this Parsha, Nun Aleph, Pei Aleph. And but the main thing I wanted to bring was that the Rebbe writes to know him how things should be communicated. And this is one of my big things and things that I do, Mashiach or other things, okay? That is always trying to do exactly this Hera. We're not talking about compromising. The Rebbe doesn't say here, he says, B'kelim de Elam Atikun. He's not saying take away the Teichen. Like we said before, the Em is Dav Zayin, but it has to be L'fe'efun HaMekablim. In this case, you need Tikkun. Okay. Well, I'm going to go. If I don't finish them all, I'll continue as always next week. Oh, here's the other side. Here's what I mentioned before. This, I received this. It was Chedesh El, I think it was Mem Zayin, something like that. On Koponim, we printed in a Sicha, not printed, we gave to the Rebbe to be Magia, Sicha, some sharp aces about people who had tinus, I think, about Neshek. I don't remember now for sure. So here's what the Rebbe writes. And a lot of people who see this are shocked somewhat, but the Rebbe said, Loi kol hanidbar, kol, quote unquote, alts. Not everything that's spoken b'Shabbos Kedesh, b'Beis HaKnesses v'chulu. In shul, tzarich li's nitfus umufus chutza or b'frad be'elul. Now this, a lot of people when they see it for the first time, they say, what does that mean? The Rebbe speaks Shabbos.
Which year?
Mem Zayin, I think this was. I think it was Mem Zayin, maybe Mem Vov.
And it looks pretty old, like earlier, no?
No, it's not.
Messy, like year and later years.
No, this is Mem Vav Mem Zayin. If you know the handwriting, no, this is Mem Vav Mem Zayin. I have it. Yeah. So when you read it the first time, you say to yourself, 1 second. So the Rebbe speaks on Shabbos. It's not on tape. It's not the Barabim. Not everything has to be published. So then, how do you decide what you have, what's not? So it's a good question, but the Rebbe clearly said it. In other words, there's some things, not everything is fit for print, because it could be misunderstood. We all know the Hira the Rebbe gave to Volpa about this. It doesn't mean whether it's emes or not. Obviously, the Rebbe wouldn't say it if it's not tachlis emes kemuva, but whether it's to be printed and mufatz. Chutza, befrat el, because it was sharp words, and el, you have to be careful. You don't say anything that's critical of Jews, etc. So the Hira is pretty straightforward. It just means how much care you have to take when you publish something and when you're communicating with others. You have to always think 10 times before you say something, because it could be misunderstood and it could end up having results that the hepech of what you want. Consistent with all the other tzatla, but nevertheless, this is a tzatla. Let me see. Let me go. Should I do one more here?
The long one.
Yeah, no. This one, I'm not going to read the whole tzatla, because this one is written to me personally. You see, my name is there. Let me just tell you, I'll do this one and then we'll stop here. Here's I really included it because it's so fascinating. The year was Tovshin Mem Beis. It's a Meredika story, actually. Mem Beis was Shnas HaShmeinim. Tovshin Mem Beis. Shnas HaShmeinim of the Rebbe. So I decided, I had to say to this, I decided Hanukkah time, not like Kirogel, we do everything a week before. Hanukkah, many months before Yud Aleph Nisan. I wrote a zettel to the Rebbe that maybe l'kvav Shmeinim Shana, we want to give out a sefer of all the Yud Aleph Nisan Maimorim from the beginning, which would include Tovshin Yud Beis, Tovshin Chav Beis, and then Tovshin Lamed Aleph and Non every year was a Fabrengen and a Maimon. So it was a good 30 Maimorim, something like that then, maybe less a little. So the Rebbe wrote to me, he wrote, Ein hazman groma lahagiyam, b'meila yatziu dover shaloi tzarech lahagasi, which was a big statement. The Rebbe said he doesn't have time to be magiyah. No, the Rebbe didn't want it to come out built in Muga. So b'meila be matziyah something that doesn't need my hagah. Now the Rebbe very rarely wrote be matziyah something. I saw that as a big schus. So I went on a whole research project. I called everybody on earth that I could reach. I mean, people in Chabad. I spoke to all the mumchim. I spoke to Rabbi, and I spoke to the mashpim, and I spoke to the rabbanim. I said, the Rebbe saying, Yatziu, what do you suggest? So now we have time. Approximately a week later, after talking to a lot of people, I wrote to the Rebbe this zettel. You don't have the whole zettel here. I have the whole thing. This is just the end with the answer. But you see how the Rebbe was mislabish himself on this. It's Meredith. So we wrote basically that we're going to want to give out the Atzah. This was the Atzah. I wrote the hemshech to what the Rebbe wrote, Latzia. Here's Atzah, Alpi, his Dabrus and Kama Rabbonim, Mashpiyim, something like that. Anash, Askonim. So we wrote to the Rebbe, it should be a book will come out, a sefer, the COVID Shnas HaShmeinim, be two chalokim, Shar HaTeira and Shar HaMaisa. Shar HaTeira would include Divrei Teira from the Tzemach Tzedek and other places that explain Shmeinim Shana, Kapitel Pei Aleph, with the biurim of the Tzemach Tzedek on Kapitel Pei Aleph. Other Maimorim, we found from the Rebbe's father something on Pei Shana. It's a chelik of Teira about Shmeinim Shana. And the chelik HaMaisa would be collecting articles and maybe some pictures of Pu'ulas of the Rebbe, how the Rebbe is affecting the world. Either Mivtzoyim or Mezdis or something like that. The Rebbe crossed out in this zettel chelik HaMaisa. He wrote, Ach v'rak kevetz teironi. Only Teira. Not interested in PR. So the Rebbe, Ach v'rak kevetz teironi. And the Rebbe added, I wrote like 7-8 things in the book, in the kevetz, and the Rebbe added 4 or 5 things himself. Is it here? Yeah. Look. You see, Lahetz le'er kevetz, u'matarosei Teira. U'lechein v'ala seder. So here's one of the rare times that the Rebbe actually, in response to us, wrote out what he wants in the kevetz. That's the first top of the tzedel. Okay. But Kedarke Bakedesh by the Rebbe, Asusa Lotata brings Asusa Deleil. So the Rebbe writes under the line, he sees Ve'ed Ve'iker. So the Kavitz is a good, became Kavitz Yir Aleph Nissen every year. Since then, till this day, every year Yir Aleph Nissen comes out of Kavitz Yir Aleph Nissen based on this Eirah. Then the Rebbe wrote Ve'ed Ve'iker. L'heitz le'er hatanya begedel godel, begedel rogel rather, and the Rebbe gives a whole description how to give out a new heitzah of Tanya. This is where the Rebbe gives the Heirah, a Tanya that in the back should have all the sharblatlach from all the years. So this was not a haratzah. Haratzah was the kavis. The Rebbe Tak accepted it with ha'aris and tikkunim. Now the Rebbe came on his own, print a Tanya. No one knew why and what the kavanah was. A week before Yir Aleph Nissen, it was top secret, but I was told because I was involved a bit. I mean, I wasn't involved in the Eitzola of the Tanya. The others did that, but you can read it settled in detail. It's not in the game Amish for this. The Rebbe said to print thousands. They printed, I think, 10,000 or 15,000 Tanyas. And he said he's going to give it out after the Fabrengen Yir Aleph Nissen Membes. So the Rebbe stood then, after the Fabrengen ended around 1 a.m. I remember exactly, the Rebbe stood till the morning and gave Tanyas, the blue Tanyas, that the Rebbe gave out that night for hours and hours, to the point that people were coming in the morning who were waking up, so they were coming to get the Tanya. It was already Elisha Shachar when the Rebbe stopped and finished. Why am I bringing this? Besides Tamlich Vivusa de Milsa, it's also geschmack to see how the Rebbe would be slavish himself in the details of how something is printed. You'll see down to the Rebbe even writes in the Tanya should have zwei Bendlach. You know what a bendel is? You know, a bookmark. You know those. The Rebbe said there should be two, and he writes what color it should be. It's mamish mededik how the Rebbe every detail, and then we learn that usually when it comes to our birthday we receive gifts, and we learned anu hara that you give gifts on a birthday. At least the Rebbe does. Al Kapanim, this cover is quite interesting. I'll finish next week. We'll do more, but I hope this was helpful. There's a lot of tremendous eros here, really. And keep the settling. You can print it out. So let's stop here. And everyone have a good time.
Why does everyone want to have a built-in will get my water printed?